Yeah, we moved down, me and my family, about 8 to 9 years ago from Auckland. We moved down for the lifestyle. We found Auckland was too busy, too much traffic, and it's a lot less stressful down here. You don't have the traffic problems.
We like our kids having the things that we had as children. So we're on a lifestyle block, a piece of land. Our children go to a small country school. They're not bothered by big city life.
Dunedin's, it's one of those places, I think it comes from the isolation a little bit, that you get some real characters living here, and everyone has a really interesting story, and they can do remarkable things. So yeah, I really do enjoy finding out about those people.
In the larger centres there's often a lot of talk about work-life balance, and I think it feels at times it's an unattainable pipe dream, but it is achievable, and I think we've got a nice balance here now.
So the team at Newsworks came to us with a problem. They basically said, as the people representing regional newspapers in New Zealand, that they thought that there were some misconceptions about regional markets. That a lot of people maybe were thinking of regional markets as sleepy backwaters with little value to offer as potential advertising targets. So the Newsworks team felt really strongly that this wasn't true. In fact, that there were big numbers of people in the regions that were really important, that the people in the regions have a real passion for where they live, that they're really engaged in their local community, also that the face of the regions is changing, and that people are engaging with media differently in the regions. And as marketers, it was important to understand that. People in the regions actually do have quite big pockets and big plans in terms of what they want to spend, and there are different ways that you need to reach and influence them. So first, we're just going to focus on the big numbers. As Brian mentioned, there are nearly 2 million people living outside of the main areas of New Zealand: Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch. 1.9 million Kiwis. That's 4 in 10 New Zealanders in these markets, and they represent 35% of GDP, which is a massive $84 billion. This chart comes from Stats New Zealand, and it looks at GDP growth across the regions. And as you can see, that all the regions have had in the last 5 years GDP growth, and in 10 out of 12 of those regions it's been double-digit growth. A lot of people focus on the dairy sector when they talk about the regions, and what we found was when we delved into the data, there's actually a really a localised impact of different types of economic drivers in the regions. So horticulture, aquaculture, oil and gas, food production and tourism are all driving this growth. On average, the salaries in the regional markets is about $82,000 a year. Now that is lower than Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch, but as we found when we talked to people in the regions, quality of life is relative. In order to understand the regions better, we took a three-prong approach. So we conducted desk research where we looked at Stats New Zealand data, MB data, and we also looked at other published reports. We did a deep dive in Nielsen's Consumer and Media Insights study. Now that's one of the largest studies that's regularly run in New Zealand. It's been running for about 20 years, and it looks at media usage, but also lifestyles and attitudes and purchasing intentions of people in the region. And that actually allowed us to contrast the people who live in the big metro centres versus the people that live in the regions. So we're going to share some of those results with you. As Brian mentioned, we also took a deep dive into 3 core markets: the Bay of Plenty, Taranaki and Otago. And to do that, we ran some online bulletin boards where we talked to around 12 people from those regions, and we actually followed them through a week and talked to them about their lives in the region. And we also talked to them about how they engaged with media and advertising during that time. We followed that up with 6 in-depth interviews in the regions, and we're going to show you some footage from those interviews today. And lastly, we conducted a survey across all the regions outside of Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch. So the sample for that was 870, and that allowed us to quantify some of the information that we got out of our qualitative research to see if the numbers stacked up across the broader regional base. So let's get into the results. Firstly, when we talked to people, we wanted to understand why it was that they loved the region that they lived in and how they engaged with the region. And what we found was there was this consistent theme of people talking about their quality of the life. And that really was strongly correlated with time. And a lot of them perceived that they had a lot more time in the regions than people do in metro centres. And they used that time equation to actually say less time in traffic equals more time with family and more time doing the things that I want to do. The cost of living was better for a lot of people. They talked about the fact that in the regions you can own a home and have a lifestyle and have a family, which in metro areas often people are feeling they have to make choices these days. Many of the people that we talk to are living in areas that are really close to New Zealand's really most beautiful and wonderful playgrounds, and they're not only living closely, they've actually got the time to go and enjoy those things. And we found that there was a real sense of community in the regions, and often people in the regions felt that that was a really important part of living there, and that was something that people who lived in big cities really missed out on. When we talked to them about, well, you know, are you missing some of the big things that happen in cities, they actually had no sense of missing out, and they actually all felt a little bit clever about what they were doing and the way that they were living their lives. So what we then did was quantify some of those sentiments in our survey. And these are the top 5 attitudes we found of people living in the regions. So number 1 and 2, I feel very positive about my life, and I may not earn as much as those in the big cities, but I have a better lifestyle. There's a real sense of community where I live for 3/4 of people, and I have plenty of time to enjoy the things I like doing. 67% said they can afford the things that they need. This quote is really typical of the kind of sentiment that we found in the regions. I think that Tauranga still has a great laid-back feel, but also a new energy where people are excited about living here and the way our town is growing. I think it's really becoming a melting pot of people from all over New Zealand and the world. This adds to the unique feel. And what we found is a lot of people were spending some of their time reading their newspaper. The Bay of Plenty Times, just in the morning over a cup of coffee. I like to read things in print, and so I often read things in paper, and I come across events I didn't know existed. Time came through as a real theme for us, and we'd seen in Stats New Zealand data that Auckland, Wellington and Canterbury had the longest commuting times of all areas, and we all probably know about that coming to work today. But what we did was quantify that, and we asked people in our regional survey, on average, how long did it take for them to go to work and come back home again. And we found that 80% of respondents said it took less than 15 minutes, which quite frankly, I live in East Auckland and work in Takapuna, and that just about made me cry. We got a really strong sense when we were talking to people that the face of the regions were changing, and that was being driven by 2 factors. One was home affordability and the other was economic drivers and investments. When you looked at the numbers, housing is actually more affordable in the regional markets. And although people in the regions are learning less, comparatively they're paying a lot less for their houses. So housing costs as a percentage of total income are much lower in the regional areas. In Auckland, and these numbers are about 12 months old, so in fact the situation is potentially quite a bit worse now. But Auckland was sitting at 19% compared to regional North Island just under 15%, and the most affordable places for housing, regional South Island. We saw this coming through in our CMI data. So this looks at the tenure of the homes that people are living in. And what we found is when you compared the 3 city areas, Auckland, Christchurch and Wellington, to the regional areas, that 26% of people in the regions were living in a home with no mortgage compared to 19% in those main city areas. And the level of renting was also much higher in the metro areas. What we then found was that there was an increase of a group of people that we called metro refugees. And these were people who were actually fleeing the metro centres and moving to the regions to take advantage of this trend. 2/3 of Aucklanders aged 18 to 34 don't think they will ever own a home, which is a pretty sad picture when Kiwis have always felt that owning a home is part of almost our right and our dream for our future. So we're seeing a lot of younger people turn to the regions for their first home investment. But we're also seeing another trend in terms of people just looking for the cash benefit for moving to the regions. So on average, if you sell a home in Auckland and move to central North Island, you'll get around a $220,000 cash benefit, which is pretty attractive when you think about it. You're probably going to get a similar level of home and, from what we've seen, a pretty good standard of living. However, it's not only the cash benefit attracting metro dwellers to the regions. Participants in our region said key drivers were being a better house for your money, so they could actually improve the living standard that they were getting in the big cities, the ability to become mortgage-free, less time travelling to work, and a slower pace of life and more time to spend with the family. We talked to Bailey's Real Estate about this trend, and they said that they've seen an ongoing, a kind of a ripple effect going through the country. So as their offices in Tauranga, Waikato and Bay of Plenty increase in terms of house sales and value, with Aucklanders moving into those markets, they're seeing people who've lived in those markets continuing down south into the country. So they're seeing further growth in south towards Hawke's Bay, central North Island and Waikato. The Herald story that you can see on the slide is actually reporting on this and talks about increasing home values in Taupo, Rotorua, Whakatane and Kawerau. So with this increase of people moving from the cities to the regions, we're also seeing a metro kind of influence in the regions. So the people we talked to spoke a lot about the growing influence of metro people on the culture in the regions. More people were coming into the regions, which was meaning more business development, which brings more development and infrastructure. And a lot of the areas we went to, they were talking about older parts of the city being rejuvenated and creating quite a buzz, and a more multicultural vibe hitting the cities, which brings with it more vibrancy, culture, cafes and entertainment. And cashed up people moving to the regions also means the means to renovate. This chart looks at people who are living in metro areas compared to regional areas, and what we found is across all types of renovation from indoor to outdoor, regional people were more likely to be planning to renovate in the next 12 months. The other key driver, as I said, was innovation and investment. The government has developed a regional investment program, and through that they've seen employment of highly skilled occupations, especially professionals, increasing in all regions. There's going to be a huge investment in regional roading over the next 10 years, and they've already upgraded 570,000 regional homes with ultra-fast broadband, and there's an additional $100 million to be spent on increasing regional connectivity. And we've seen this, there was a great story in the Herald commenting on people moving to Queenstown and actually commuting up to Auckland. And these were people who were going to Queenstown for that fantastic lifestyle, but they were able to set themselves up remotely to be able to work from down there and commute to Auckland when they needed to. Innovation and business growth was evident in the 3 spotlight regions that we went to. So in the Bay of Plenty, their international port is thriving. There's been a really huge development of geothermal energy in the area and a growing aquaculture industry. In Taranaki, there's a burgeoning oil and gas industry, and that's seen the development of 200 related engineering businesses. And in Dunedin, there are more patents registered per head of population than in any other New Zealand region. Its highly respected university is home to the medical school and New Zealand's only dental school, and has seen a regional expertise in the development of highly specialised medical devices. The city is also home to the South Island's primary port.
I think housing is cheaper. Well, you can get a lot more than you can in Auckland for your money. I think it's changing. Prices here are going up, but for us, definitely we had more disposable income.
The less commute, less time in cars makes it affordable. I'm not spending, 3 tanks of gas on petrol a month. I'm spending 1, so that makes it really affordable.
We've done significant renovations to our home. We've upgraded vehicles and done other bits and pieces that the disposable income we have here is no question is greater than what we had in Wellington when we were living there.
So how are regional people engaging and connecting with media? Well, with 1.6 million readers across the regions, newspapers play an important role in the regions. And this is a typical comment we heard from people. I think information in the newspaper helps you make better decisions about where to buy a house, where to invest money, and what's going on in terms of events and activities to enrich my lifestyle. For me, it's all about connection, which of course is the core role of media. What we found when we looked at the differences between the metro markets and the regional markets is that the regional markets tend to be more engaged with mainstream media still and less likely to be using the internet. So there's still quite a traditional use of media. When we looked at what people had done in terms of news media in the last 24 hours across newspaper brands, we found that 66% of 25 to 69-year-olds had connected to news media either through print, through a website or an app in the last 24 hours. As you can see, the news hounds who'd connected across all three platforms made up 11% of that, but there were still 35% of people in the regions who were just connecting through their print newspaper. We also find that regional people are a little bit less in love with their mobile phones than we are as city dwellers. So across all these factors, which looks at things like whether they're likely to think their mobile phone makes their lives easier or to use the phone to access the internet, regional people are using their mobile phones less than people in larger cities. We talked to people who were reading regional papers and just asked them about why they were reading it. And for them it was really the physical enjoyment of reading the paper still came through as a really strong driver. And it was also important to catch up with things that were relevant to me that will impact my life, my work and my region. A lot of people talked about time out for themselves and that extra time to relax. And it was an important part of the news mix. So looking for different sources of information for national news, international news, local news and community news. And obviously to see what's on, and a big driver was what's on sale. We found when comparing regional people to metro people that they seem to be more engaged with the newspaper. So they're more likely to find their paper stimulating, to reflect on the things they've read in papers, to consider newspapers to be their most trusted source of information and to be relevant to them and the place that they live. And compared to metro readers, they're more likely to read more copies of their daily newspaper every week. So 4.3 issues compared to 3.5 issues. Time spent reading is also greater in the regions, and that does tie in with the fact that they've got more time to spend. So on average they're spending 2 hours and 23 minutes reading a daily newspaper in the regions compared to 1 hour and 59 minutes in the metro centres. But they're also spending a bit less time surfing the internet, in fact 2 hours less than their Auckland counterparts.
Yeah, I've been a subscriber, well, ever since I probably just about left home, I think. Yeah, just can't go without listening to sports news in the morning. Yeah, my parents have always had it. They still get it as well. So it's well and truly within me to read the ADT every day.
It's nice to see people you know in media and stories that you're connected to, and good things that are happening in your community within the paper. So the local content tends to focus more often on some of the good news stuff that's happening about the place.
Oh, I just think it has real good coverage of local sport, and then also a good mix of national and international, and it covers lots of different sports. It's not just your rugby and your cricket, which I love, but I still like to know what's going on in other sports as well.
The types of news that the Bay of Plenty Times is giving me, probably a lot of sort of local sort of anecdotes, things like that, which I'm not going to find anywhere else.
I guess relaxing, I would usually be reading it with a cup of tea, so yeah, it's just time to sit there and kind of, find out what's going on, just, a relaxing time.
For me, reading the paper is something I really like to do, just to take a break in the mornings over a coffee. The physical act of flicking through the pages is something I really enjoy.
You're all right. So then we took some time to look at how big the pockets of people were living in the region. And what we found was they're more likely than those living in 3 major centres to feel more financially comfortable. So they can agree that they can afford to spend on extras and that they have fewer financial concerns. And this quote was very typical. We have more disposable income than if we lived in Auckland, as the cost of living is just cheaper. Regional people have more investments than people who live in metro areas, so they're more likely to own their own home, vehicles, more investment funds, bonds and family trusts. A little thing I thought was interesting is that they're more likely to invest in boats or caravans, and we also know that they've got the time to use those things. When we look at people with incomes over $60,000 in both markets, regional people are more likely to spend more money on a new car if they buy one. In fact, annual new car sales in Northland, Otago and Southland grew at 3 to 4 times the rate of car sales in Auckland in the last 12 months. Regional people spend more on food, $20 odd more a week on groceries and more on dining out. So we asked some of the people that we talked to what their plans were for the next 12 months. And key themes were, oops, gone backwards, home renovation or decoration, new furniture, travel, international, new vehicles, investing in education or business, saving for retirement and property. In the next couple of years, a few last bits of home renovations, the bathroom, etc., travel to see my daughter in Australia and possibly my son playing cricket overseas, and a new car. So we wanted to quantify that to see how big the spending trends were in the area. We found that over half of people were planning a holiday in New Zealand and 37% were planning a trip overseas in the next 12 months. Around a quarter were planning on buying personal technology, buying a new vehicle or purchasing home technology. And there was also significant spend on home renovations, 27% intending to conduct home renovations and 19% intending to buy new whiteware. Financial investments and insurance and study were also a key spending area with around 10%. What we then did was ask people what they intended to spend across these categories. And what we found that was some big buckets of spend. So if you look at all the investment in new homes and investment properties, extrapolated across the number of people in the regions, that represented $43 billion in spending on homes in the next 12 months. $2.2 billion spent on international travel and $1.7 billion on renovations, $2.6 billion on new cars. Disposable income was a real key theme. We didn't have to take a drop in income to live here, and so we have more disposable income than if we lived in Auckland, as the cost of living is cheaper. Disposable income goes a lot further down here, with realistic house prices meaning less money is used on mortgage payments. So how do you reach and influence people in the regions? This chart looks at some call to action measures, and it compares newspapers, television and radio. Over 2/3 of people will talk about an ad that they've seen in the paper, and they're 20% more likely to talk about TV and more than double who will talk about radio. Advertising in newspapers take regional people down the purchasing funnel, outperforming other media through consideration, deciding where to buy and actually buying something that they've seen advertised in that media. Regional people are more likely to think that if something is important, that newspapers will cover it effectively, and they'll find the latest new products in the newspaper as well as find out about the best deals. These are some of the ads that people we talked to on our bulletin board pulled out as noticing from the paper that week. And this is a comment that came through that sort of summed some of the things up people said. I'm most likely to read ads in the newspaper or the internet. I ignore all advertising on TV. I mute it when the ads came on as I find them extremely irritating. Often they're loud and stupid and I have no interest in them. If I'm looking for something, I can choose to read it in the newspaper. So we weren't sure about how strong that sentiment was, so we wanted to quantify it through our survey. And so we asked people across a broad range of media, newspapers, magazines, newspaper websites or apps, radio, social media and TV, which ads they found the most annoying and which ads they found the most useful. What we found was 1 in 2 people considered the most annoying advertising was on TV, and magazines and newspapers were the least annoying. And that's a lot to do with the fact that people can tune into the advertising that's more relevant to them. Newspapers had the most useful advertising, and what I also thought was really interesting was social media was the least useful, and that's an area that we're sort of seeing a lot of activity on at the moment.
I guess because the way I read the paper is at the end of the day I like to sit down and just, it's that whole tactile thing of just having something. I find it really relaxing, sound and everything like that. Yeah. It's just, you're sitting down, you're kind of in your own world, and it's just always there too. So this is how I first read the paper, then I'll go back and I'll think about, oh, budget, I'll come back and read that.
We upgraded our TV a couple of months ago, and we weren't actually sure what model we wanted, and we didn't want to do a whole lot of homework. There's a lot of information out there. Thinking about that, we actually, it was a mailer, and it came with our paper. We purchased it from farmers in the end, but we would never have considered farmers for a TV, to be honest.
Big sales, quite good to see. Yeah.
What sort of big sales?
Like farmers, when they have a big 50% off sale. I saw one today, the warehouse has 50% off children's clothing. I noticed that because I've got 3 children and I'll be going there probably this afternoon, so stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it's quite important to still reach out to people in the regions. There is that extra disposable income, for a lot of people that have moved here. I know in New Plymouth there's a lot of people from overseas that have moved over. And yeah, it's not as if everyone here are farmers, there's just quite a diverse range of people, so you can't kind of pigeonhole it and think that people here won't be interested.
Lastly, what we wanted to do was run a case study to understand how different types of advertising in the newspaper might engage differently with people in the regions. We tested a random series of advertisements across several categories: airline, automotive, banking and telco, and we showed survey participants each advertisement independently and got them to rate them across a range of factors. And I'll just show you some examples of some of the ads that we looked at. So what we did was looked at 2 groups of ads, so those with a more national brand message and brand positioning, and those that carried a regionalised message. So you can see the national ad wrong way around, left, is a straight 48-hour Aussie sale on now. However, on the regionalised advertisement, it makes a reference to Palmerston North. If you look at the 2 Vodafone ads below, one's a national message, the other one connects directly to the people of Otago. We've got the guy on the rugby shirt and we've got the words Otago there. Same with these ads examples. So we've got a Rabobank nationally focused ad versus an ad that specifically mentions the Hawke's Bay. And in the Blue Oval Roadshow, you can see a map referencing a local area. So we wanted to understand whether people engaged with these advertisements in a different way. What we did was get them to rate the ads across these key areas. And what we found was across every area, when we compared the results of those ads that had been regionalised in their creative versus those that had taken a straight national approach, was that they were much more likely to engage well across these areas. And there was a particular strength in the area that you would say is obvious, which is this ad would appeal to people like myself and my region, was 16% higher than those nationally focused ads. But the other 2 areas that we thought were really interesting is this ad makes the brand feel different to other brands in the same category, so a strong differentiation, and this ad makes me feel differently about the brand and service advertised, so stronger engagement. We also got people to associate which words that they would relate to those brand communications. So you can see the top two for both sets of ads were eye-catching and informative, but you can really see the regionalised pull apart when it comes to relevancy, which is what people makes people engage with advertisements in the first place, and memorability. So they had stronger cut through and impact than just having a straight national message. So we think that's a really important thing to consider when you want to target the regional market. It is a big spending market. Nearly half of all household expenditure is made in the regions. It's a $46 billion market. So in order to gauge with that market well, we'd really encourage you to think about the creative content of your advertising. So what we found after all our research was that we really believed that the myth had been busted for the regions, that we did find that people were passionate and parochial about their local regions, that people felt that they were getting all the benefits that you can get in a metro city but with the regional lifestyle. It's an important target. They've got the time, they've got the money and the aspirations, but it is really important to engage with them at a local level that's relevant to them and influence them with local connection.